Have you ever kept a family secret for decades? I won't ask what, just curious.
Here is the part nobody admits over dessert, even when the coffee is poured and the forks are down. Every family has its gravity, and mine orbits my sister Lauren like she is the only planet with a working atmosphere, while the rest of us hold our breath and pretend we enjoy the thin air. So when she arrived late to my engagement party in a white sweater dress that looked suspiciously bridal and made a point of sweeping me into a hug that smelled like expensive lilies and triumph, I already knew. We were not going to get through the night without an announcement that did not belong to me, even if I could not yet tell where she planned to plant the flag. The restaurant lights had that warm glow that flatters everything, even nerves, and the patio opened onto the river where boats slid past like patient thoughts. And my fiancé Mark kept one steady hand on the back of my chair like a quiet promise, while my parents tried to act relaxed and overcompensated by orchestrating the waitstaff as if they were conducting a symphony with salad tongs, which would have been funny if it did not also signal that they sensed weather on the horizon and decided to manage optics rather than clouds. When the toasts began, Lauren raised her glass with an expression I have seen since middle school when she accidentally scheduled her birthday dinner on my debate finals weekend, and she waited for the room to hush, then placed one hand on her stomach with the theatrical care of someone lowering a crown onto her own head, and she announced the pregnancy with a breathy little pause that made the word land like confetti. And before the air settled, she followed with a tilted smile and that line about stealing the spotlight again, which she delivered as if it were a cute signature move rather than a habit that has left dents in everyone else's big days. People laughed the way people laugh when they think permission has just been granted to forget the original occasion, and I sat there feeling the applause ripple over my skin while I cataloged details the way nurses chart vitals. Because data is power and I plan to use mine. Mark did not flinch. He watched me instead, and the look we traded was not dramatic, it was practical, a quick assessment of a fire door and a mental note of where the hinges were, because if you understand the building you can exit with dignity and maybe pull the alarm on your way out. I did not make a scene, partly because I am not interested in becoming a family myth and partly because the servers had just set down the lemon pasta I had been dreaming about since Tuesday. So I smiled with my teeth and kept my eyes soft and let the laughter run its course, then rose for my own toast and thanked everyone for being there with a voice that did not wobble, and I mentioned my late grandmother's lake cottage, the one she left to me because I spent summers repainting the porch railings while Lauren chased fireworks on other people's docks, and I said we would be sharing more soon about the place that taught me what home feels like, and the people who know our family history straightened in their chairs like birds catching a draft. I did not elaborate, because timing is seasoning and I wanted the flavor to sink in. My mother shot me a look that mixed caution with pleading, a kind of do not escalate expression she has perfected over the years, and I gave her the smallest nod I could manage while keeping my spine from curving toward apology, because I am done apologizing for wanting my own weather. After dinner I performed the quietest act of self-respect I know, which is control the exit. I thanked the staff individually, tipped like the night had been perfect, and left Lauren mid-story at a high top where she held court about prenatal vitamins as though she had invented folic acid, and I walked arm in arm with Mark down to the river, where we stood under the string lights and let the breeze erase the stickiness of other people's laughter. We did not rehash, because he knows that what I need after impact is not analysis but agency, so he asked what would feel good and I said clarity, and we made a plan in 3 sentences and a shared smile that felt like an oath. We would not fight in the group chat, we would not beg for space, and we would not allow the wedding to become another auditorium where Lauren tests her acoustics. Instead, we would choose a place that refuses spectacle, a timeline that answers only to us, and a note that does not ask for permission. The next morning, after coffee strong enough to hold a grudge, I designed a different save the date, simple and elegant and a little bit pointed, and I scheduled the send while my hands were steady and my conscience was cleaner than it had any right to be. When the cards hit inboxes, the phones began to chirp like a forest coming alive, and within 5 minutes Lauren's name flashed across my screen in that urgent way that suggests an emergency, but usually means optics, and I looked at Mark, who nodded once, and I tapped accept, because witnesses make truth easier to carry. I said hello and listened to the inhale that always precedes her performance, and before she got to the first accusation, she demanded to know whether I had lost my mind, because who chooses that weekend and that venue and that rule? And I said we do. And the line went very quiet, the way a stage feels 3 seconds before the curtain lifts, and somewhere in that silence I realized she had not yet figured out the part that would matter most. She did not know which keys I held. When Lauren finally inhaled enough oxygen to shape the first accusation, she launched into a rant about how the date I had chosen was inconsiderate to extended family travel plans and possibly even dangerous because of seasonal roadwork near the lake, which was a creative reach even for her, and I let the first wave crash without trying to interrupt because people usually reveal their strategy in their opening paragraph, and hers was clear as glass. Paint me as chaotic, force me to apologize, and position her as the responsible one who might graciously help me fix what I had broken if only I admitted I was in over my head. I listened for a full minute, then I told her gently. The way you tell a neighbor you are going to trim the tree that drops sap on your car, that the save the date was not a placeholder but a promise, that the ceremony would be small by design, and that it would be held at Grandma May's lake cottage, adults only, with a sunset dinner and a quiet fire, and that we had chosen that very weekend with intention because we wanted the water at its warmest and the mosquitoes mostly tired, which was true, and because it was the same weekend she had been teasing for a gender reveal she had not actually booked, which I did not say yet because that truth needed the right chair to sit in. She came back with the familiar pleading disguised as principle, insisting that an adults-only policy was cruel to her future little family and would alienate Aunt Carol, who never goes anywhere without the twins. And I reminded her calmly that adults-only does not mean anti-child. It means we are crafting a quiet evening without nap schedules and overtired meltdowns, and that it would be one night of grown conversation after years of birthdays hosted at trampoline parks and pizza places with floors sticky enough to wrench a shoe off your foot, and she tried to shift into parental martyr mode, but tripped over the simple fact that there was no baby yet, only an announcement and an appetite for confetti. Which is when she pivoted to the venue and called it manipulative that I used the cottage because I knew people loved it, and I let out a breath I had been holding since my grandmother's funeral and said, very evenly, that grandma left the cottage to me because I kept it standing when the roof leaked and the dock rotted and the taxes came due, that I alone hold the deed and the gate code, and that I was not borrowing family nostalgia to strong-arm anyone. I was honoring the woman who taught me to sand a railing and to finish what I start. There was a pause long enough to hear her tongue press against a tooth, which is the sound of Lauren recalculating. My parents called within the hour as if they had been waiting behind a curtain for their entrance cue, and my mother launched into a logistics sermon about overlapping weekends and how the family could not be split between 2 events because that would look bad on social media. And my father added something about how rain at the lake in late summer could complicate parking on the field, which sounded like he had rehearsed with my mother in the kitchen while stirring coffee, and I thanked them for caring and said we had checked the forecast trends and arranged overflow parking at the church lot up the road, and more importantly, we were proceeding regardless because my relationship was not a neighborhood council vote. And my mother softened and tried a different tactic, offering to contribute a generous sum if we could find a more inclusive date, which was a sweet way of saying sell your autonomy for a venue upgrade. And I told her we had already paid deposits in full and would not be accepting money with strings, which landed like a door closing gently but firmly, because I refused to buy peace that only lasts until the receipt fades. The group chat lit like a carnival after dark, with cousins asking neutral questions that were not neutral and friends trying to be Switzerland, while Lauren worked the side channels to paint me as impulsive, and I did the only thing that works in these moments, which is send a single clear message that sets the scope, and then leave it to breathe. I wrote that we loved them, that the ceremony would be intimate and adults only at the cottage on the announced date, that we understood not everyone could attend, that there would be a larger open celebration later in the fall for all extended family and kids, and that any person who felt uncomfortable with the boundary had full permission to decline without guilt or debate. And then I put the chat on mute and turned to actual tasks that make a wedding real, like confirming the caterer who knows how to feed people without turning them into a production, and the guitarist who plays standards like he means them, and I felt the steadiness return, like circulation to a limb that had been pinned under a heavy object. Mid-afternoon, Lauren's husband, Evan, left a voicemail with the tone of a man who once believed complications would bore him and now understands they perform with good lighting, and he said he wanted to get ahead of misunderstandings and clarify that the gender reveal date had been tentative because the ultrasound timeline was fuzzier than they expected, which was a polite professional way of saying, please stop organizing your real life around our PR calendar. And I saved the message because records are not revenge, yet they often make revenge unnecessary, and as the sun slid toward that syrupy gold the lake does every late summer, my phone buzzed with a calendar screenshot from an unknown number showing a reservation request for the cottage pavilion stamped with a red denial. The kind of administrative auto-reply I had set up months ago when I digitized the booking system for my own sanity, and beneath it, a caption in a bubble I could not trace. Looks like the lake is loyal. Which might have been a joke or a warning or something closer to solidarity, and for the first time since the party I felt the ground tilt in a different direction. By the third day after the save the date went out, my phone looked less like a personal device and more like a call center headset because every branch of the family tree seemed to think they were uniquely qualified to mediate the dispute. And the group chat itself had turned into a battlefield where passive-aggressive emojis were being deployed like smoke grenades, while private side messages carried the real grenades with phrases such as, maybe you didn't think this through, and it would mean a lot if you considered your sister's feelings, as if my entire adult life had been built on ignoring hers. The longer I watched the chaos unfold, the clearer it became that Lauren was conducting her own press tour, painting me as an impulsive bride who had deliberately sabotaged her pregnancy reveal, when in fact the reveal was never booked, only floated around in conversations like a helium balloon waiting for someone else to hold the string, and I knew if I stepped into the arena to defend myself, I would be playing the part she wanted me to play, the ungrateful sister lashing out while she stood radiant and misunderstood. So instead of wrestling in the mud, I did something sharper. I wrote a single, carefully worded email, not a text, not a post, but an email with a subject line that sounded boring enough to keep people from forwarding it. And inside, I laid out the facts with the tone of a lawyer who has already closed the case. I explained that the cottage was legally mine, that the wedding was intentionally small, that deposits were paid and contracts signed, and that our decision was final not because we enjoyed drama, but because we refused to keep negotiating our milestones against someone else's appetite for spotlight. I ended the email with one line, I hope each of you will make the choice that brings you peace, and then I pressed send, and for the first time in days the silence in my inbox was louder than the pings, because the people who thrive on noise rarely know what to do when given a closed door. Lauren, of course, found another door. That evening she began spreading rumors that Mark was controlling me, which was both predictable and insulting, because the man had done nothing but respect my choices and remind me I didn't need anyone's permission. She slipped the suggestion into conversations with mutual friends, hoping it would echo back to me through casual mentions, but what she forgot is that friends who have sat at your kitchen table until 2 in the morning do not suddenly forget who you are. And when one of them quietly told me what she was saying, I laughed harder than I had in weeks. Rumors rot when exposed to daylight, and I chose not to chase them down one by one, because that would give them the weight they didn't deserve. My parents tried once more to bribe me into compromise, this time dangling the promise of covering the honeymoon costs if we would agree to move the wedding into the city, into a hall that could seat hundreds, with children and cousins and noise. But I told them no so gently they couldn't accuse me of cruelty, reminding them that accepting money tied to conditions had been the trap of every generation before mine, and that I refused to build my marriage on a foundation of someone else's checks. My mother cried, not out of heartbreak but out of the recognition that I was drawing a line she had never drawn for herself, and my father, who has always preferred the appearance of unity over the reality of it, muttered something about families should stick together before retreating to the safety of silence. Then came the voicemail, the one that made me sit up straighter. Evan, my brother-in-law, sounded exhausted, the kind of exhaustion that comes not from work but from living next to a storm that never ends, and his message was cautious yet revealing. He admitted that the pregnancy timeline was complicated and that the gender reveal date Lauren had been promising might not be realistic because things don't line up the way she's saying, and though he didn't spell it out, the implication was as sharp as broken glass. The math did not add up. The announcement was more about theater than truth, and the story Lauren had sold so confidently at my engagement party might have been polished to shine brighter than reality. I replayed the voicemail twice, listening not only to his words but to the pauses between them, the way his throat caught before phrases like, "You should know," and "Don't let this derail you," and I realized he wasn't just giving me information. He was asking me to hold it. Like a lifeline. I didn't share the message, not yet, because timing remains everything, and in the arena of family politics the most powerful card is the one no one knows you hold. Instead, I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen table with Mark, and told him exactly what I had heard, and he nodded slowly before saying the only thing that mattered: we wait, we don't waste it. Outside, the night pressed against the windows with the kind of quiet that feels like a stage right before the curtain lifts, and I knew that while Lauren thought she was running the play, the script was slowly, invisibly, bending in my direction. By the following week, the atmosphere around me felt less like ordinary family tension and more like the early tremors of a campaign season, because Lauren had shifted her strategy from quiet rumor to open competition, announcing to anyone who would listen that she was planning a celebration of new life that would conveniently land on the same weekend as my wedding, as though the entire family calendar was a chessboard she had the right to rearrange at will. She booked a banquet room at a mid-range event space in town, sent digital invitations laced with pastel graphics and tiny baby footprints, and framed it not as a gender reveal, but as a family joy gathering, which sounded as vague as it was intentional, because vagueness lets you pivot when the truth does not cooperate. Friends I had considered neutral began quietly asking if I minded that she had scheduled something so close, and I smiled with the kind of politeness that conceals steel, telling them that everyone has a right to celebrate their milestones, though in my head I was already arranging the counterweight, because what Lauren never understood is that control is not seized through noise, but through quiet leverage that ripples underneath. She even tried to poach mutual friends, reaching out individually to bridesmaids and hinting that they might want to prioritize what really matters, which was a masterstroke of arrogance wrapped in faux concern. One of them, who has known me since high school, forwarded the message to me with the simple note, "She's losing it," and in that moment I realized something important: I did not need to fight to prove loyalty. Because people who have walked with you through breakups and job losses already know where to stand, and their silence in the group chat spoke louder than any declaration. Still, I decided to ensure my own strategy was not defensive but deliberate, so I turned my attention to the registry, a small detail that can become a declaration when handled correctly. Instead of cluttering it with endless kitchen gadgets and throw pillows, I curated it down to essentials and experiences, making it clear that Mark and I were not begging for gifts, but creating a future together on our terms, and I sent the link directly to the people I trusted most, bypassing the gossip channels entirely. The responses were immediate and warm, filled with private notes of encouragement, which told me that while Lauren was building a circus, I was quietly building consensus. When she realized her messages weren't breaking through, she escalated in the only way she knows: optics. She posted on social media about how some people think family events should exclude children, but real love welcomes everyone, a statement accompanied by a photo of her standing under a balloon arch, hand placed prominently on her belly. Eyes aimed at the camera with the practiced expression of someone who knows how to cast themselves as a martyr. I did not respond, not publicly, not even indirectly, because silence in the right context is louder than rebuttal, and within hours several comments beneath her post pointed out that plenty of weddings are adults only, that it is neither cruel nor unusual, and that choosing peace on your day does not equate to exclusion. Watching her scramble in the comments reminded me of a magician who drops a card trick and tries to convince the audience it was intentional, and I almost felt sorry for her until I remembered the smirk on her face when she announced her pregnancy at my engagement party. Behind the scenes, I refined the seating map for the reception with Mark, drawing lines that were less about who liked whom and more about who could sit near each other without turning dinner into a courtroom. It felt like arranging dominoes so they would never fall, and when we finished I saw clearly how different our event would be from hers. Ours would be intimate, deliberate, and rooted in respect, while hers was balloon-heavy theater built to distract from questions no one dared ask. My small acts of planning became their own kind of revenge, not because they humiliated her but because they made her efforts look cheap by comparison, and that is the kind of revenge that cannot be undone by louder speakers or flashier decorations. Then, just when the noise seemed to be settling, a photo landed in my messages from a private account with no name, just a grainy profile picture of the lake itself. It showed balloons, a banner stretched between two trees with the cottage address painted across it, and a scribbled note taped to the corner that read, "Try and stop me." At first I thought it had to be a prank, some cousin with too much time and a flair for dramatics, but the more I studied it, the more certain I became that it had been taken on the actual property, because the tree line and dock were unmistakable. Someone had been at the cottage, staging a photo meant to rattle me, and while the message was designed to provoke panic, I felt something altogether different: clarity. It told me Lauren was willing to trespass, willing to turn this into more than rivalry, willing to risk legality just to maintain her performance, and that realization did not scare me, it steadied me. Because when someone shows you how far they're willing to go, they also reveal exactly where their breaking point lies, and from that point on, I knew my revenge would not be improvised or emotional. It would be precise, timed, and inescapable. The lake woke up the morning of our wedding with that stubborn gray light that makes everything look like it belongs to a photograph from another decade, and the clouds stacked themselves like a jury that needed convincing, yet the air was warm, the water unruffled, and the cottage looked exactly as my grandmother would have wanted it, with the porch rails freshly painted, the hydrangeas heavy as secrets, and the path to the dock lined with lanterns that would turn into a runway when the sun dropped, which comforted me more than any pep talk because places, unlike people, do not pretend to be something they are not. Mark brewed coffee that could have fueled a ship, kissed my shoulder in a way that said no matter what noise waited beyond the gate we were already inside the only promise that mattered, and then we started the small, quiet engine of the day. Because if you keep your hands moving with intention, panic has nowhere to sit, and by mid-morning the florist had tucked pale flowers into jars, the guitarist was tuning under the sycamore, and the caterer was tasting the sauce with the same concentration I bring to difficult conversations, which felt like a good omen even as my phone vibrated out of sight like a trapped hornet. We had changed the gate code the night before not because I expected a siege, but because prudence sometimes looks like pettiness to people who have never had to protect a boundary, and I had asked Mrs. Dwyer, the caretaker who has watched this shoreline longer than most of us have been alive, to keep an eye on the back road where teenagers sneak in to jump off the old stump, and as guests began to arrive in twos and threes, exhaling when the view opened like a held breath, she stepped up onto the porch with the unhurried dignity of someone who believes in finishing sentences, and handed me a rolled banner I recognized from the photo that had rattled me, along with a short report delivered in a tone that did not invite debate. A car had idled at the gate before dawn. The driver had tried 3 codes in that impatient way that tells you the person believes rules are for other people, and when the gate did not yield, they had driven around to the service path and found it blocked by the stones we had moved there last night, after which they muttered something about coming back with friends and left in a forward rush that looked like retreat wearing expensive sunglasses. I thanked her, I breathed, I put the banner in the shed, and I understood in my bones that security is not a mood, it is a decision that must be refreshed like paint and passwords, and today it would be refreshed with vows. The ceremony itself felt like a nerve unpinched, because the people who showed up did not come to be entertained, they came to witness, and when the guitarist slid into the first notes and Mark took my hands I could feel the room, not a real room, but the one that exists when shared attention becomes shelter tighten around us, and in that shelter I said the words I had chosen, long words that did not apologize for being specific, and he said words that made my mother cry in a way that rinsed something clean rather than drowning it, and then we kissed, and for a few minutes even the clouds stopped threatening to interrupt. The reception on the lawn was a lesson in measured joy, slow food, real conversation, stories told without amplification, and a chalkboard by the lemonade that read, in small script, that there would be a wider celebration in the city come fall for every cousin and every kid, which was less a concession than a declaration that our boundaries were not a rejection of family, but a redesign of how family happens around us, and the guests read it, nodded, and carried on without commentary, which may be the highest form of respect. Then came the toast, the one I had written not as a weapon but as a mirror, which is more dangerous when raised at the right angle. I thanked our friends for showing up and our parents for loving us imperfectly in a way that still counts, and I told a short story about Grandma May teaching me to sand splinters out of a railing. How she said people will lean where it feels safe and pull away where it snags, and that the work of a home is to make a place where leaning is possible without losing skin, and I let the metaphor do the work that names would have ruined. Because anyone who needed to understand already did, and anyone determined not to never would, and when I lifted my glass and said that love is not a spotlight but a table with enough chairs, I watched something pass across faces like weather changing over water, regret here, recognition there, and a flash of anger on my mother's mouth that softened into something I could not yet name. That was the revenge I wanted, not humiliation or triumph, but the quiet recalibration of a room where the old rules no longer fit. I had scheduled a text to the family chat to go out as dessert arrived, a message that announced the fall celebration date with a link to a simple RSVP and a note that the registry had been converted into a fund to repair the dock and plant new trees in Grandma's name, and within minutes the pings took on a different cadence. Curiosity and relief mixing with whatever else people carry to events like this, and then my phone lit with Evan's name. Not a call, just a message that said thank you for not saying it out loud. She needed that wall more than you know, which told me the math I had suspected was not entirely arithmetic, and that he had seen the mirror and decided to face it. Another message followed from an unknown number, a photo of an ultrasound with a timestamp that did not match the story we had been told, and a single line, "Ask her about Monday," that I stared at until the edges of the picture blurred, because proof, once it exists, insists on being used, and yet I put the phone face down under my napkin, because not everything needs to be decided before the cake is cut. When the lights along the path finally clicked on and the lake turned to black glass, Mark and I slipped down to the dock and sat with our shoes off while the last of the guests laughed up on the lawn, and he asked if I felt done, and I told him I felt accurate, which is sometimes the best you get in families like ours, and somewhere behind us a car door shut on the road with the careful finality of a person who does not want to be heard leaving, and my phone buzzed once under the napkin with a new message I could not see, and I decided, for tonight, to let it rest, because the shore was holding, the railings were smooth beneath my hands, and the gate would be there in the morning whether the next step was truce or another round.